Well, everyone, thank you guys for inviting me to be here to speak on this topic. I appreciate it. And in order to ensure that I allocate enough time to each aspect of the issue, I actually wrote my testimony out, and then I'll be happy to take questions afterwards. So, to start off with, THSC exists to support homeschool families and to defend the right of all families to make decisions for their children. We believe that families are best qualified and in the best position to evaluate, respond to, and meet the needs of their children. In fact, the data on the comparative success of homeschool students makes this conclusion inescapable. Homeschooling is the longest running, most exhaustive, and most wildly successful experiment in educational choice ever undertaken. Homeschooling is the fastest growing form of education in the country. Studies indicate that homeschool graduates are 25% more likely to attend college, 35% more likely to participate in community service projects, 31% more likely to understand politics and government, and on average will score higher than 87% of the population on national standardized achievement tests. So this is a strong testament to the reality that more choices for families leads to better outcomes for students. Furthermore, the estimated 150,000 homeschool families in Texas represent a hefty economic savings to the state of between $3 and $4 billion a year. Nevertheless, homeschool families and private school families in Texas are still required to pay twice for education, once for their child, and then a second time through the public education system that they still help to fund. When placed on top of the fact that many families give up a second stream of income in order to raise and educate their children, this requirement to pay twice makes the economic strain more than many families can sustain. Those families who can sustain it are very willing to literally pay the price in order to provide their children with the best possible educational upbringing. Despite the unfair nature of the system, few families currently homeschooling would argue that they actually need any type of help from the state in order to provide a quality education for their children. The commendable and significant sacrifice that these families make, unfortunately, does not alleviate the reality that for many other families, the cost of paying twice is simply too high. Families cannot opt out of paying for public education when they pursue private education instead. Therefore, for many families, the more relevant question is how much better they could do if the state were no longer requiring them to pay for education twice. The state loses untold amounts of savings from these families who might choose private education if they were allowed to use some of those tax dollars that they are currently sending to public schools to educate their own children instead. This background has raised the debate which we are currently having. Is there a more equitable way to allocate the funds spent on education so that families who choose private education can utilize some of their tax dollars that they are currently still required to pay? THSC's position on school choice legislation is exactly the same as our position on every other issue. First, we support increases the ability of families to make decisions for their children. And second, we oppose restricts the freedom of families to make decisions for their children. Not all school choice bills will pass muster under these criteria. I was asked to answer two specific questions as part of my testimony today. First, what are THSC's priorities for the 2019 legislative session on the topic of school choice? And second, how does your organization go about crafting your priorities? Although THSC has no plans to draft school choice legislation for the 2019 session, we will certainly be involved in the language of any school choice legislation that is considered in order to ensure that the necessary protections for homeschool families are included. When analyzing our position and suggested language for school choice bills, THSC has two main priorities in mind. First, we want to ensure that homeschoolers are treated fairly compared to other students in the bill. And second, we want to ensure that the bill affects only those families who choose to participate. In 2017, after THSC's suggested language was added to the bill, we supported legislation creating education savings accounts in Texas because it provides families who choose to participate with more control over their children's education. However, that same year, THSC opposed H.R. 10 at the congressional level because as a condition of participating in the school choice program created by the bill, states would be required to count all homeschool and private school students in their state. Thus, H.R. 10 would have affected all families, even those who chose not to participate, by creating a statewide registration system for homeschoolers and private schoolers. Well-intentioned or not, THSC will oppose any bill that institutes new mandates on families who have not opted into the program. The modern concept of school choice was originally proposed by legendary economist and free market proponent Milton Friedman in his 1955 essay, The Role of Government in Education. Since that time, school choice has exploded across America to the point where we now have 63 programs in 30 different states. That 30 counts the District of Columbia as a state, which technically it's not. But as should be expected for virtually any new idea, the idea of school choice has been subject to several significant concerns. However, as you've already heard, the idea of school choice is not, in fact, new. Certainly not in the sense that it is an untested idea. Therefore, we have virtually no basis for speculation as to how a school choice program would work if it were implemented in Texas. With 63 programs active in 30 other states, the sampling available to test our theories is tremendous. With that in mind, I'd like to explore the history on the most common concern raised from within the conservative camp. And more or less, that concern is this, that it will result in the loss of our freedom for those who participate in homeschooling or private schooling. The concern is voiced more or less in two different forms. The first one is that it is a backdoor method being used by big government supporters to gain access to private schools and home schools. I will only spend a few moments on this point because it can be sufficiently rebutted with one simple observation. If this is true, then liberal big government supporters are the only ones unaware of the plan. Ever since it was originally proposed by Milton Friedman in 1955, liberal supporters of big government have been the largest consistent opposition to virtually any form of school choice legislation. If, in fact, it is being orchestrated by them in an attempt to take over private education, then they were unfortunately left out of the loop on their own master plan. Free market conservatives have been the driving force supporting school choice legislation over the same period of time. So essentially, this argument presumes that both sides are mistaken as to which side they're actually on. Thankfully, the historical precedent on school choice gives great insight as to the second point, or the second version of the argument, which is that it will lead to increased regulation on homeschools and private schools. Simply more broad wording of the same argument, more or less. So of the 63 school choice programs in 30 states, not a single one has ever led to any documented case of increased regulation on all homeschools and private schools as a result. Notably, the exact same concern has been raised over THSC's legislation to allow homeschool students access to public school extracurricular activities, which I think was asked about earlier. So generally, the fear is that if homeschool students are allowed UIL access, then it will lead to state regulation of all homeschoolers. However, of the 34 other states that allow UIL access for homeschoolers, not a single one has ever seen an increase in regulation as a result. The response is often given that other states are not as free as Texas is and that it would affect Texas differently. Again, the data proves this point wrong. Of the 10 states whose homeschool laws are similar to or less restrictive than Texas's laws, 8 of them allow homeschool participation in public school extracurricular activities or publicly funded school choice programs. Not a single one of them has ever seen an increase in homeschool or private school regulation as a result of these programs. When something as valuable as the control over your child's education is at issue, it is natural that the concerns such as this one would run strong. However, when not just the majority, but the entirety of the data from a significant number of states demonstrates the argument to be false, the decision to deny other families the right to participate or not participate at their own discretion simply is not justified. THSC believes that each family should be empowered to make decisions that is in the best interest of their family. If one family feels that the requirements of participating in a particular program are more than they are willing to accept, then we will ardently defend their right to refuse participation. However, if another family feels that the benefits of the program make complying with the requirements worth it for them, we will just as ardently defend their right to choose participation. The fact that one family has weighed the costs and benefits and decided that they would not participate does not justify an effort to deny that choice to everybody else. Although the debate on this point has been heated, the strong majority of homeschoolers agree with this. In the spring of last year, Ragnar Research conducted a scientific survey of the homeschool community to determine the split of opinion on issues of school choice and UIL access. Homeschoolers were asked the question, would you say that you support or oppose establishing education savings accounts where homeschool and private school parents can use the tax dollars designated to their local school for their own child's educational expenses? 71% stated that they support ESA legislation. 20% indicated that they would oppose it. Similar to the school choice issue, UIL access for homeschoolers has also generated heated debate around the state. However, homeschoolers were also asked in the same survey whether they would support or oppose allowing homeschoolers to participate in UIL activities at the local public school. 77% stated that they would support UIL access. 16% stated that they would oppose it. These numbers indicate that although the debate in the homeschool community on these two topics remains heated, the unanimity of opinion is actually fairly clear. You may have also gleaned from this context my response to the second question that I was asked to answer, which is, how does your organization go about crafting your priorities? THSC crafts our priorities around the premise that families should be empowered to make decisions for their children. Within the guidelines mentioned above, this means that we will support bills which increase the ability of families to make these decisions, and we will oppose bills that decrease the ability of families to make these decisions. Empowering families with more options should never involve placing new mandates on those who choose not to participate. However, those who are unaffected by another family's choice to participate should not seek to deny them that choice due to their own personal preference. To summarize, the primary concern raised against school choice from within the conservative camp is that it will lead to an increase of regulation of homeschools and private schools. The data on this point could not possibly be more one-sided. In the abundance of data that we have available from 63 programs in 30 states, not a single time has school choice legislation ever caused an increase in regulation on all homeschools or private schools. Proponents of this argument have not suggested any particular method that this regulation will come through, only that it will happen. In fact, usually the fear is not based on any particular line of text in the bill that the person can point to. It is essentially a free-floating anxiety that something bad will happen, but when, how, and by who is undetermined. The interesting thing about it is that in order for new regulations to be imposed on homeschools and private schools, a new bill that includes those regulations would have to be passed and signed by the governor. That is the exact same risk that we face every single legislative session. Passing school choice legislation does not create that risk. It does not empower the state to regulate homeschools and private schools through any means which they do not already possess. The fear is not based on anything that is actually in the bill. It is based on something that could be in a future bill. THSC will never oppose today because we fear a bad bill tomorrow. The risk of a bad bill is an ever-present one, and so each bill should be judged on its own merits. In this situation, the question is whether each family should be allowed to make their own decisions regarding whether they will or will not participate in a school choice program. Regardless of whether any of us would choose to participate for our own family, THSC will always defend the right of each family to decide for themselves what is in the best interest of their child. I hope that the rest of you will do the same. Thank you, and I am available for any questions.